My husband begged me not to come to his law school graduation. Why? I asked. He sneered. I don't want people to know you're just a waitress. Coldly he said, I'll say you are dead. Never contact me again. I left crying. Years later, on wedding day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, his mother, his bride, everyone asking, what happened? Don't come to my graduation. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress. Samuel delivered this news 2 weeks before the ceremony I had been planning to attend for months. I had already requested the day off from Riverside Diner. I had already picked out the nicest dress I owned, a simple navy blue one I bought secondhand but had dry cleaned for the occasion. I had already imagined sitting in that audience watching my husband walk across the stage to receive the law degree I helped pay for with tip money and extra shifts that left my feet bleeding. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here to witness stories about resilience and reclaiming your worth. If you believe that honest work deserves respect regardless of title, please consider subscribing. It helps us share more stories like this. Now let's see what happens next. But he did not want me there. Not because there was limited seating. Not because of scheduling conflicts. But because I was just a waitress, and that embarrassed him in front of his classmates whose families were lawyers and judges and people who mattered. Just a waitress, I repeated, tasting the poison in those words. Is that what I am to you now? He finally looked up from his phone, and his expression held no warmth, no recognition of the 3 years we had spent married or the 6 years I had spent supporting his dreams while my own stayed locked in a box under our bed. Haley, be realistic. Everyone there will be from families with money and status. I cannot have them meeting you and wondering why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. That was the moment I understood. I had been erased long before he spoke the words out loud. But let me take you back to where this story actually begins, to the place where I spent most of my waking hours for 6 years, to the life I thought meant something before Samuel reduced it to an embarrassment he needed to hide. Riverside Diner sits on the corner of 5th and Morrison, the kind of place that smells permanently of bacon grease and coffee that has been sitting too long on the burner. The vinyl booths are cracked and patched with duct tape in 3 different colors. The jukebox in the corner only plays songs from the 70s, stuck on an endless loop of Eagles and Fleetwood Mac that drives some customers crazy and soothes others into nostalgia. The floor tiles are chipped in places where decades of foot traffic have worn them down to the concrete beneath. The fluorescent lights flicker when it rains, which in our city means they flicker about 200 days a year. For 6 years this diner was my kingdom. I knew every inch of that place, every quirk and malfunction and small grace. I knew which booth had the wobbly table that needed a folded napkin under the left leg. I knew which coffee pot poured faster and which one dripped if you tilted it wrong. I knew that the ice machine made a grinding sound for exactly 3 seconds before it dispensed, and that the kitchen door squeaked unless you pushed it at just the right angle. More than that, I knew the people. I knew every regular customer by heart, knew their orders before they opened their mouths, knew their habits and patterns and small human details. Professor Hendricks came in every morning at 7:15 and ordered black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. He always left exactly $2 on the table, folded in half like a tiny tent, and he always sat in the 3rd booth from the door where the morning light came through the window at an angle that let him read his newspaper without glare. The law students from the university down the street treated Riverside like their second office. They would camp out in the back booths for hours, nursing single cups of coffee while their textbooks and laptops spread across tables like small empires claiming territory. They debated constitutional law and criminal procedure in voices that grew louder as the caffeine kicked in, gesturing with highlighters and pens, sometimes staying so late that I had to wipe down around them during closing. I moved through their conversations like a ghost, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while they talked about tort reform and appellate briefs and summer internships at prestigious firms. They never looked up when I approached their table. They never paused their discussions to say thank you. They never learned my name even though I wore a name tag pinned to my uniform every single shift. To them, I was part of the furniture, as permanent and invisible as the chipped formica tables and the flickering lights overhead. My co-workers became my family in ways that surprised me. Maria had worked the morning shift for 8 years, and she possessed this uncanny ability to read customers the moment they walked through the door. She could tell who would tip well and who would run her ragged for pocket change. She could spot trouble before it started, the customer who would complain about everything or the one who would try to leave without paying. She taught me how to handle difficult situations with a smile that never reached her eyes and words that sounded pleasant but carried warnings underneath. Devin washed dishes on weekends while putting himself through community college. He was studying business management, taking classes 3 nights a week after his shifts ended. He had this philosophy about work that he would share while scrubbing pots in the back, his hands red from hot water and industrial soap. He said every job teaches you something valuable if you pay attention, and washing dishes teaches patience and the satisfaction of turning chaos into order. He said the people who looked down on service work were the ones who had never done it, who had no idea how much skill and endurance it required. Then there was old Joe, who had been cooking at Riverside for 30 years. He arrived every morning at 5 to prep for the breakfast rush, and he stayed until the dinner orders stopped coming. He rarely talked, communicating mostly in grunts and nods, but he noticed everything. When I came in with red eyes or moving slower than usual, he would slide an extra piece of pie across the counter during my break. No words, no questions, just this understanding that sometimes kindness comes in the form of banana cream and silence. The work exhausted me in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. My feet ached every single night, a bone-deep pain that no amount of soaking in Epsom salts could fully ease. I developed calluses on my heels and permanent indentations on my shoulders from carrying heavy trays loaded with plates and coffee pots. My hands smelled like coffee even after I scrubbed them until the skin turned pink and raw. I learned to smile through rudeness and condescension, to swallow anger when customers snapped their fingers at me or called me sweetheart in voices that made the word sound like an insult. But there was dignity in this work that I came to understand over time, a value the outside world refused to acknowledge because it measured worth in college degrees and salary brackets rather than reliability and honest effort. I showed up for every shift on time. I worked holidays and weekends without complaint. I learned every aspect of the job until I could run the entire front of house by myself if needed. I took pride in doing the work well, in making sure coffee cups stayed filled and orders came out correct and customers left satisfied even if they never bothered to learn my name. I met Samuel Thornton 3 years ago at this very diner. He came in late one Tuesday night during finals week, looking exhausted and broke. He sat in the back booth with a stack of law textbooks and counted out change to see if he could afford both coffee and food. I watched him separate quarters from dimes, his shoulders hunched with the particular tension of someone doing math they did not want to finish. I brought him coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich, and when he tried to pay I told him it was a mistake order that would just go to waste if someone did not eat it. That was a lie. I paid for the sandwich myself out of my tip money. But something about him in that moment reminded me of my younger brother who had struggled through community college, and I could not stand watching someone go hungry while studying. Samuel looked up at me with gratitude that seemed genuine, and we started talking. He told me about law school, about the pressure and the competition and the constant fear that he was not smart enough or connected enough to make it in a field dominated by people from wealthy families. I told him about working at the diner, about the strange satisfaction of making someone's day slightly better with a good meal and friendly service. We talked until my shift ended, and then he walked me to the bus stop even though it was out of his way. We started dating within a month. He would come to the diner during my breaks and we would sit in the back booth drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. He made me laugh with stories about his eccentric professors and competitive classmates. I made him feel grounded, he said, like there was life outside the pressure cooker of law school. Within 6 months, we were married at the courthouse with Maria and Devin as witnesses. We could not afford a real wedding or even a nice dinner afterward, but it did not matter because we were young and in love and convinced that our feelings could overcome any practical obstacle. Those early months of marriage felt like true partnership. We lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where you could hear every conversation through the thin walls and smell whatever your neighbors cooked for dinner. Our furniture came from thrift stores and curb alerts. Our dishes were mismatched. Our bed frame was held together with duct tape and optimism. But it was ours and we were building it together. Samuel would stay up late studying while I soaked my aching feet after double shifts. We would fall asleep tangled together on our second-hand couch, too tired to make it to the bedroom. We whispered about the future we would build once he graduated and started his career. He talked about opening his own practice someday, about defending people who could not afford expensive lawyers, about using his education to help people rather than just accumulate wealth. I believed him because I wanted to believe that we shared the same values, that we both understood what it meant to work hard for something meaningful. I supported him in every way I knew how. When his student loans were delayed and rent came due, I covered it with tip money I had been saving for new work shoes. I wore my old shoes for another 6 months even though the soles had worn through and my socks got wet when it rained. When Samuel needed expensive textbooks and bar prep materials, I picked up extra shifts and went without new clothes for over a year. My winter coat had a broken zipper, but his study materials arrived on time. When he was stressed about exams, I made sure the apartment stayed quiet. I worked evening shifts so he could study during the day without interruption. I bought his favorite foods even when money was tight because I thought small comforts mattered during difficult times. I believed I was investing in our future together, that his success would be our success because we were a team. I can see now how wrong I was. But back then I worked until my feet literally bled. There were nights I came home and peeled off my socks to find blisters that had burst during my shift, my shoes stained pink with diluted blood. I would clean the wounds and tape them up and put the same shoes back on the next morning because I could not afford to miss work and I could not afford new shoes. The shift in how Samuel treated me started so gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining it. Somewhere around his second year of law school, things began to change in small ways that accumulated into something larger and more damaging. He stopped introducing me as his wife at law school events. We would arrive together at study group parties or networking receptions, and when his classmates asked who I was, he would just say, "This is Haley," with no context or explanation. At first, I thought maybe he assumed people already knew we were married. But then I noticed how he would change the subject immediately after introducing me, steering conversations away from any questions about our relationship or how we met. When someone asked what I did for a living, Samuel would jump in before I could answer and say something vague about how boring day jobs were compared to legal theory, redirecting the conversation back to law school topics. He stopped inviting me to study group gatherings at our apartment. He would schedule them during my dinner shifts at the diner, and when I pointed out that I could request different hours, he said it was fine, that I would probably be bored listening to them discuss cases anyway. I accepted this explanation because I wanted to believe it because the alternative was too painful to acknowledge. When his classmates asked about his personal life, he gave vague answers that erased me from his narrative entirely. I discovered this by accident one evening when I stopped by the law library to drop off the lunch he had forgotten. I overheard him talking with 2 classmates about their weekend plans, and one of them asked if he was doing anything with his girlfriend. Samuel said he was probably just going to study, that he did not have time for a relationship with the demands of law school. I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible to them, holding his forgotten lunch and listening to him pretend I did not exist. I confronted him about it that night and he said I had misunderstood, that he just meant he did not have time for the kind of relationship other people had, the kind with regular date nights and weekend trips. He said I should understand that he was under enormous pressure and could not worry about how he phrased things in casual conversations. I let it go because I wanted peace more than I wanted truth. But the erasure continued and intensified. Samuel stopped posting pictures of us together on social media. His Instagram and Facebook pages showed only images of him at law school events or studying in coffee shops, carefully curated to present the image of a serious, dedicated student with no distractions. When I asked why he never posted our photos anymore, he said social media was superficial and he was trying to maintain a professional image for future employers who might look at his profiles. He stopped mentioning me in conversations with his professors or during networking events with legal professionals. I knew this because occasionally one of his classmates would come into Riverside Diner, and when I mentioned being Samuel's wife, they would look confused or say they did not know he was married. Each time this happened, something inside me cracked a little further. I told myself he was just stressed, that law school pressure was making him behave strangely, that things would get better once the intensity of studying eased. I made excuses for behavior that needed no excuse, only acknowledgement. But deep down, something cold and certain was growing in my chest, this knowledge that I was becoming invisible in my own marriage, that my husband was systematically erasing me from his life while I was still living in it. Now, standing in our apartment with Samuel's graduation band still echoing in my ears, I understood that the erasure was complete. I was not just invisible. According to Samuel, I was not supposed to exist at all. The waitress who had supported him through 3 years of law school, who had worked until her feet bled so he could focus on studying, who had sacrificed her own dreams and financial security for his education, that woman was just an embarrassment he needed to hide from people who mattered. Just a waitress, I whispered again, and the words felt like ashes in my mouth. Samuel stood up from the couch, pocketing his phone. "I'm glad you understand." The ceremony is invitation only anyway, so it's not like you were really going to be able to attend. That was a lie. I had seen the graduation information. Family members were welcome. But I did not argue because what was the point? He had already decided I was not family. He had already decided I was not worthy of being seen with him on his big day. I need to get back to studying, Samuel said, walking toward our bedroom. He paused in the doorway and looked back at me with an expression I could not quite read. Oh, and Haley, I've been telling people you died. A few years ago. So if anyone ever asks, just don't contact me. It's cleaner that way. He closed the bedroom door behind him, leaving me standing alone in our living room with the Thursday night meatloaf getting cold on the coffee table and my entire world collapsing around me like a building with faulty foundation finally giving way to gravity and truth. I stood frozen in our living room staring at the closed bedroom door. The meatloaf on the coffee table had stopped steaming. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Samuel had just told me he had been informing people I was dead, and then he walked away to study as though he had simply mentioned a change in his class schedule. My legs felt unsteady, so I sat down on the couch where moments earlier he had delivered his verdict. The fabric was worn smooth in places from 3 years of us sitting here together watching movies, eating takeout, pretending we were building a life. I pressed my palm against the cushion and felt nothing but old foam and springs that had lost their tension. I needed to understand. I needed him to explain how you tell people your wife is dead while she is still making your meals and paying half the rent. I walked to the bedroom door and knocked, softly at first, then harder when he did not respond. Samuel, we need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish. His voice came through the door, muffled but clear enough. I have a contracts exam on Monday. I need to study. I opened the door anyway. He sat at the small desk we had bought together from a second-hand store, his laptop open, his textbooks arranged in neat stacks. He did not turn around when I entered. You cannot just tell me you have been pretending I am dead and then go study for an exam. He sighed, the kind of exhale that suggested I was being unreasonable and tiresome. Haley, I already explained this. Everyone at graduation will be from families that matter. Lawyers, judges, business owners. These are people who can help my career. Having them meet you would raise questions about my judgment. Your judgment, I repeated. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I had never learned to speak properly. What exactly would they question? That you married someone who works hard. Someone who supported you through school. He finally turned in his chair to face me. His expression held no warmth, no recognition of the person I had been to him for 3 years. They would question why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. Why I chose someone with no education, no prospects, no connections that could benefit me professionally. Each word landed with precision, carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. This was not spontaneous cruelty. This was rehearsed, considered, deliberate. I helped pay for your degree, I said, and I hated how my voice shook. I worked doubles so you could afford textbooks and bar prep materials. I covered rent when your loans were delayed. I sacrificed so you could focus on studying. And I appreciate that, Samuel said in the tone people use when they do not appreciate something at all. But appreciation does not change reality. The legal profession is about connections and image. I cannot build the career I want while being associated with someone whose greatest accomplishment is remembering how people take their coffee. The casual dismissal of my entire existence burned worse than outright hatred would have. Hatred at least acknowledges that someone matters enough to inspire strong feeling. This was something colder, a calculation that I had served my purpose and now represented a liability to be eliminated. So you told people I died. I said it as a statement, not a question, because I needed to hear the words out loud again to make them real. Yes. He turned back to his laptop, already done with this conversation. When people asked about family or my personal life, I told them my wife passed away a few years ago in an accident. It was the simplest explanation. Simplest for who? For everyone. He clicked something on his screen, his attention already elsewhere. It generated sympathy, which helped in some situations. It explained why no one had met you. And it avoided awkward questions about why I was married to someone inappropriate for my social circle. The word inappropriate echoed in my head. 3 years of marriage reduced to a single adjective that meant I was not good enough, had never been good enough, would never be good enough no matter what I sacrificed or how hard I worked. When did you start telling people this? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Around the middle of second year. He said it casually, like he was discussing when he had started using a new study method. That's when networking became more important and people started asking more personal questions. Second year. That was 18 months ago. For 18 months, Samuel had been walking through the world as a widower while I served coffee and cleared plates to pay our bills. For 18 months, people had been offering him sympathy for a loss that never happened while I ached from double shifts so he could study without financial stress. Does anyone know the truth? I asked. Does anyone in your entire law school world know I exist? He hesitated, and that pause told me everything. A few people from first year met you briefly. But most of them transferred or we lost touch. No one who matters knows you are real. No one who matters knows you are real. The sentence was so absurd I almost laughed. I was standing right here, breathing, speaking, existing in 3 dimensions. But according to Samuel, I was not real because the people who could advance his career did not know about me. This is insane, I said. You understand that, right? This is not normal behavior. Normal is relative. Samuel closed his laptop and finally gave me his full attention, which somehow made everything worse. In my world, having the right connections and maintaining the right image is normal. Essential actually. You come from a different world where those things don't matter. But in my profession they matter more than almost anything else. More than honesty. More than the person who supported you through school. Yes. He said it without hesitation, without shame. More than those things. I need you to understand something, Haley. I am going to be successful. I am going to build the kind of career that most people only dream about. And I cannot do that while dragging around someone who represents everything I am trying to move beyond. Everything you are trying to move beyond, I echoed. You mean poverty? Working class jobs? The kind of life I live? Yes. Exactly that. He stood up from his chair and I noticed he was taller than I remembered, or maybe I had just shrunk. I grew up poor, Haley. I know what it's like to be looked down on, to be dismissed because you do not have the right background. I worked incredibly hard to get into law school, and I am not going to waste that opportunity by staying connected to a life that will hold me back. I am not a life. I am a person. I am your wife. Not for much longer. He walked past me toward the closet and pulled out a duffel bag. I think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to focus on studying and this conversation is not productive. I watched him pack my clothes, selecting items randomly and shoving them into the bag without care. My favorite sweater, the one with the small hole in the sleeve that I had been meaning to fix. The jeans I wore on our first date. A dress I had bought for his law school formal that he had asked me not to attend at the last minute. Samuel, we need to talk about this properly. You cannot just erase someone from your life. He zipped the bag and held it out to me. I already have. And I need you to accept that and move on. Do not come to graduation. Do not contact me at school or at work. If anyone ever asks, tell them we were never married. Tell them you have me confused with someone else. Just stay away. What about the apartment? What about our things? I will handle the apartment. Take what you need tonight and I will have the rest sent wherever you end up. He pulled out his phone and started typing. I am texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight if you need to. Your sister knows about this? Emma knows we are separating. She does not need to know the details. He set the duffel bag at my feet like he was dismissing a servant. I am going to continue studying now. Please be gone when I come back out. He walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. I heard the lock click into place. I stood in the living room holding the duffel bag he had packed for me, looking around at the apartment we had shared for 3 years. The second-hand couch where we used to fall asleep together. The coffee table where I set down his Thursday meatloaf that was now cold and congealing. The kitchen where I had made countless meals while he studied. The bathroom where I had soaked my bleeding feet after working doubles to cover his expenses. None of it had ever been ours. It had been his, and I had just been borrowing space in it until he decided I was no longer useful. I picked up my phone and called my sister Emma. She answered on the second ring. Can you come get me? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need somewhere to stay tonight. Emma did not ask questions. She just said she would be there in 20 minutes and told me to wait outside. I grabbed the duffel bag Samuel had packed and walked out of the apartment without looking back. The hallway smelled like someone's dinner cooking, something with garlic and tomatoes. Normal life continuing normally for people whose worlds were not collapsing. I waited on the front steps of the building. The evening air was cool and I had not thought to grab a jacket. Cars passed on the street. People walked by with shopping bags and briefcases heading home to lives that made sense. I sat there feeling like I had been hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me recognizably human, leaving just a shell that looked like Haley but contained only emptiness. Emma pulled up in her old Honda and I climbed into the passenger seat without speaking. She looked at me, at the duffel bag, at my face that must have shown everything. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "He told people I died," I said. "And then he told me to leave." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. She did not say anything else. She just drove and I watched the city lights blur past the window, thinking about how you can be alive and dead at the same time, how you can exist and not exist depending on who is telling the story. We pulled up to Emma's apartment complex, and she helped me carry my hastily packed belongings inside. Her guest room was small but clean, with a bed that had too many pillows and curtains that blocked out the streetlights. She brought me tea that I did not drink and sat with me while I stared at the wall, trying to comprehend how love turns into annihilation. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emma finally asked. I shook my head. Talking required energy I did not have, explanations for things I did not understand myself. "Okay," she said. "I will be in the next room if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, I lay down on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Samuel was studying for his contracts exam, probably relieved to have me gone, probably already planning how to maintain his fiction of being a tragic widower. And I was here, officially erased but inconveniently still breathing, trying to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who promised to love me had decided I was better off dead. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later, slid under Emma's door in a manila envelope with no return address. I found them on a Tuesday morning while Emma was at work, sitting on the doormat like they had been waiting patiently for me to wake up and acknowledge their existence. I carried the envelope to the small kitchen table and opened it with hands that no longer shook. Grief had transformed during those 3 weeks at Emma's apartment, hardening from something fluid and overwhelming into something clearer and more solid. The papers inside were exactly what I expected. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences due to lifestyle disparity. That bloodless legal phrase reduced 3 years of my life to a bureaucratic checkbox, as though the violence of being erased could be captured in standardized court documents. I signed them that afternoon with a pen Emma kept in a drawer full of batteries and takeout menus. My signature looked small and unfamiliar on the line, like it belonged to someone I used to know. I mailed the papers back that same day, standing at the post office counter while the clerk weighed the envelope and asked if I wanted tracking. I said no. There was nothing inside worth tracking. Within a week, I had moved into a studio apartment above a used bookstore on Maple Street. The rent was cheaper than what I had been paying with Samuel, and the landlord was an elderly man named Mr. Chin who asked no questions when I explained I needed a place immediately. The apartment had slanted floors that made furniture placement difficult and a radiator that clanked loudly at random intervals throughout the night. But the windows faced east, and every morning the sunrise painted the walls in shades of gold and pink that made the space feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. I furnished it slowly with pieces from thrift stores and curb alerts. A reading chair with faded upholstery that was still comfortable. A small wooden table that wobbled unless I folded a napkin under one leg. Mismatched dishes from the Goodwill bins. Plants for the windowsill that I kept alive through sheer determination, as though their survival was somehow connected to my own. Each purchase felt like reclaiming territory, like building something that belonged only to me with no ghosts of failed partnership haunting the corners. I returned to work at Riverside Diner the Monday after I signed the divorce papers. Walking through that door felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a place you left as one person and entering as someone completely different. Maria was wiping down the counter when I arrived for my shift, and she looked up with an expression that held no pity, just solid understanding. "You back for good?" she asked. "Yeah. I am back." She nodded once and handed me a clean apron. "Table 6 needs coffee and the couple at the window booth are ready to order." That was it. No intrusive questions about what had happened or where I had been. Just the routine of work that required my attention and gave me something concrete to do with my hands and mind. I tied the apron around my waist and picked up the coffee pot, and for the first time in weeks I felt steady. Maria noticed the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide, but she never pressed for details. She just made sure I ate during my breaks, appearing with toast or soup that she claimed was extra from a cancelled order. When I needed a moment to collect myself in the bathroom, she covered my tables without comment. Her kindness was practical and unobtrusive, the kind that does not demand gratitude or explanation. Devin was working the weekend shift when I came in on Saturday, his hands red from hot water and industrial soap as he scrubbed pots in the back. He had this way of talking while he worked, sharing observations about life that sounded like philosophy disguised as casual conversation. "You know what I figured out about dishes?" he said while I was filling salt shakers during a slow period. "Every single one starts out dirty. Food stuck on, grease baked on, stains that look permanent. But if you just keep working at it, keep scrubbing, eventually it comes clean. Nothing stays ruined forever if you put in the work." I looked at him, at this 20-year-old kid putting himself through community college while washing dishes, and I realized he understood more about resilience than most people twice his age. "That is a good philosophy," I said. He grinned. "Yeah, well, dishes teach you things if you pay attention. Patience mostly. And the fact that a fresh start is always possible." Old Joe started making my favorite comfort foods without being asked. I would be working my section, and he would slide a plate of grilled cheese and tomato soup across the kitchen counter, catching my eye with a gruff nod that said more than words could. Sometimes it was his special mac and cheese, the kind he only made when someone needed it. Sometimes it was pie, still warm from the oven with extra whipped cream. These people saw me. They valued my work and my presence in ways that had nothing to do with who I was married to or what credentials I held. They measured worth differently than Samuel's world did, in reliability and kindness and the small daily acts that kept the diner running. For the first time in years I felt visible, and that visibility was healing in ways I had not expected. Emma checked in regularly, showing up at my new apartment with groceries I had not asked for and wine I definitely needed. She never said the words "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She had met Samuel exactly 3 times during our marriage, and each time she had come away with observations she kept mostly to herself. "He looks at other people at parties like he is shopping," she had mentioned once carefully after a holiday gathering. "Like he is always scanning for someone more interesting or useful." I had defended him then, made excuses about networking being part of law school culture. But Emma had been right. She had noticed how Samuel stopped mentioning me in his social media posts, how his Instagram transformed from images of us together to carefully curated shots of him alone at coffee shops and law libraries, presenting the image of a serious student with no distractions or complications. Now she just showed up with takeout from my favorite Thai place, and we would sit on my wobbling table eating pad Thai while watching terrible reality television. She provided sarcastic commentary about the manufactured drama on screen that made me laugh until I cried, and those moments reminded me that not everyone I loved had betrayed me, that some bonds survived even when others shattered completely. I developed routines that were entirely mine. Saturday mornings I walked to the farmer's market 3 blocks from my apartment, buying fresh vegetables I cooked in my tiny kitchen. Sunday evenings I spent in the bookstore downstairs, where Mr. Chin let me browse for hours without any expectation that I would buy anything. I read novels about other people's problems and memoirs about survival, and slowly I began to understand that my life was not over, just different than I had planned. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and the leaves outside my window shifted from green to gold to brown. I worked my shifts at the diner and came home to my small apartment and built a life that was modest but honestly mine. I was not happy exactly, but I was stable, and stability felt like an achievement after months of emotional freefall. Then came the morning that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday, 8 months after the divorce had been finalized. I was working the breakfast shift, moving between tables with the coffee pot, refilling cups and clearing plates in the familiar rhythm that required no conscious thought. 2 law students sat in the corner booth, the same one where Samuel used to study 3 years ago. They were deep in conversation about someone's upcoming wedding, and I was only half listening as I approached with the coffee pot. "Did you get your invitation to Samuel Thornton's wedding?" one of them asked. My hand froze mid-pour, coffee splashing slightly over the rim of the cup. I set the pot down carefully and pretended to wipe the spill while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Yeah, it looks like it is going to be huge," the other student replied. "His fiancé's family is apparently spending a fortune. Her dad is that appellate judge, right? Judge Ashford. Victoria Ashford. Can you imagine landing someone like that? Samuel really upgraded from that tragic backstory he had going. The whole dead wife thing. They laughed and the sound cut through me like broken glass. I finished wiping the table and walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Victoria Ashford. Daughter of an appellate judge. Exactly the kind of pedigree Samuel had been cultivating, the exact opposite of a waitress who embarrassed him with her working-class existence. He had not just left me. He had upgraded me, traded authenticity for advantage, swapped the woman who supported him through law school for someone whose connections could advance his career. And he was getting married, celebrating this new partnership while still telling people his first wife had died tragically years ago. I finished my shift moving through the motions automatically, clearing tables and refilling coffee while my mind spun with this new information. When my shift ended, I walked home slowly, taking the long route through the park where fall leaves crunched under my feet. The air smelled like wood smoke and approaching winter. Back in my apartment, I sat at my wobbling table and stared at my laptop for a long time before opening it. I had not searched for Samuel since the divorce, had not looked at his social media or checked on his life. I had been trying to move forward, to build something new rather than obsessing over what I had lost. But now I needed to see. I needed to know what story he was telling, what version of reality he had constructed around my erasure. I opened my laptop and typed his name into the search bar. And what I found made something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not jealousy but a darker form of clarity that felt almost like purpose taking shape. Samuel's Instagram profile loaded slowly on my old laptop, the images appearing one by one like evidence in a case I had not known I was building. The first photograph showed him at what looked like a charity gala, wearing a tailored suit I knew he could not have afforded when we were married. Victoria Ashford stood beside him, her hand resting elegantly on his arm, both of them smiling with the easy confidence of people who had never scrubbed floors or counted coins for groceries. I scrolled down. More photographs appeared, each one carefully composed and lit. Samuel at a legal conference with a name tag that identified him as an associate at Morrison & Wells, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Samuel and Victoria at what the caption identified as a vineyard weekend, wine glasses raised against a sunset that looked professionally photographed. Samuel alone in what appeared to be his new office, law books arranged artfully behind him, his expression thoughtful and accomplished. But it was the captions that made my hands start to shake. Under the photograph from the charity gala, he had written about gratitude for second chances and the importance of honoring those we have lost by living fully. The comments beneath were full of heart emojis and supportive messages. People wrote about his strength and resilience. Someone mentioned how inspiring it was to see him finding happiness again after such devastating loss. I clicked on an older post, one from 6 months ago. A photograph of Samuel standing alone on a beach at sunset, his back to the camera, looking out at the ocean. The caption read, "3 years ago today I lost my best friend and partner. The grief never fully leaves, but I have learned that carrying love forward is the greatest tribute we can offer those who shaped us. She would want me to keep building the life we dreamed about together." The comments on that post numbered over 100. People shared their own stories of loss. They thanked him for being vulnerable. They praised his emotional maturity and his ability to transform tragedy into motivation. One comment from someone whose profile identified her as a partner at his law firm said that his resilience in the face of personal tragedy was one of the things that made him such a valuable member of their team. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not the hot flash of anger but something more dangerous and calculated. Samuel had not just told a few people I was dead. He had constructed an entire public mythology around my fictional death, complete with anniversary posts and philosophical reflections about grief and growth. My erasure had become performance art, carefully staged and widely applauded. I opened a new tab and searched for Samuel's name along with the law school. The third result was an article from the Alumni magazine published 4 months ago. The headline read, "Rising Star, How Personal Tragedy Shaped One Graduate's Approach to Justice." My finger hesitated over the trackpad before I clicked the link. The article opened with a photograph of Samuel in his office, the same one from his Instagram but shot from a different angle. The text began with what the writer called his remarkable journey through law school, balancing academic excellence with the emotional weight of losing his spouse during his first year. I read the interview slowly, feeling my pulse accelerate with each paragraph. Samuel described our marriage as a beautiful but brief chapter, a partnership cut short by circumstances he preferred not to detail out of respect for her memory. He talked about how the loss had taught him about the fragility of life and the importance of fighting for justice on behalf of people who could no longer fight for themselves. He said his late wife had always believed in helping others, and that her memory motivated him to pursue civil rights law rather than more lucrative corporate work. None of this was true. Samuel had never expressed interest in civil rights law during our marriage. He had talked constantly about making money, about building the kind of practice that would let him afford the lifestyle he wanted. And I had never shared any particular philosophy about helping others beyond the basic human decency of treating people with respect. But the interviewer had eaten it up, weaving Samuel's fabricated narrative into a compelling story about perseverance and purpose. The article included a quote from one of his professors saying that Samuel's ability to channel personal tragedy into professional drive made him exactly the kind of attorney the legal system needed. Another quote from a senior partner at Morrison & Wells mentioned that they had been impressed not just by his academic credentials but by his character, which had been tested and proven through unimaginable loss. I clicked back to his Instagram and scrolled further. There were more posts stretching back over 2 years, each one carefully maintaining the fiction. A photograph of a book about grief with the caption about finding comfort in unexpected places. A shot of him running a 5K with a caption about how physical challenges helped him process emotional pain. An image of a sunset with a quote about carrying memories forward while building new dreams. The performance was meticulous. He had created an entire digital memorial to a version of me that had never existed, a saintly dead wife whose loss made him more sympathetic, more admirable, more hireable. Every post generated dozens of supportive comments. Every public display of grief earned him social capital that translated directly into professional opportunities. I found his LinkedIn profile next. His bio mentioned overcoming personal adversity during law school, though it was more subtle than his Instagram presence. But the recommendations from professors and colleagues made references to his resilience and emotional strength. One recommendation specifically mentioned his ability to maintain excellence despite circumstances that would have derailed most students. Then I found the engagement announcement. It had been posted 2 months ago on both his profile and Victoria's. The photograph showed them on what looked like a yacht, Victoria's left hand displayed prominently to show an engagement ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The caption talked about finding love again after loss, about being grateful for second chances, about honoring the past while embracing the future. Victoria's parents had commented with congratulations and heart emojis. Samuel's colleagues from the law firm had written supportive messages. Friends I did not recognize shared their happiness for him. And threaded through all of it was this underlying narrative of the tragic widower who had suffered and healed and now deserved his happy ending. I clicked on Victoria's profile. Her Instagram was equally curated, full of photographs from charity events and gallery openings and weekend trips to places I had only seen in magazines. She was beautiful in the way that expensive education and good breeding create, polished and poised and utterly confident. Her bio mentioned her work at a non-profit legal foundation and her passion for criminal justice reform. There were several posts about Samuel, each one glowing with affection and admiration. In one caption she wrote about how his strength in the face of tragedy had inspired her to live more fully. In another she mentioned how honored she felt to be chosen by someone who understood the preciousness of love because he had lost it once before. She had no idea. Victoria Ashford, daughter of an appellate judge, graduate of an elite university, dedicated to justice and reform, had no idea she was marrying a man who had casually erased his living wife from existence because she embarrassed him. She thought she was getting the grieving widower who had transformed pain into purpose. She had no idea she was getting the man who had told me I was better off dead than sitting in his graduation audience. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my studio apartment. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. Outside my window, I could hear traffic and distant voices and the normal sounds of a city going about its evening. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a strange calm that felt almost detached from my body. Samuel had not just told a convenient lie. He had built an entire professional identity on the foundation of my fictional death. Every connection he had made, every job opportunity he had received, Every expression of sympathy and admiration he had collected, all of it was contaminated by this fundamental deception. He had weaponized my erasure, turning it into social capital that opened doors and generated trust. The unfairness of it was staggering. I had given him 3 years of marriage and 3 years before that of friendship and support. I had worked until my feet bled so he could focus on studying. I had sacrificed my own financial security and my own dreams to help him build his future. And he had repaid me by killing me off and using my corpse as a stepping stone to success. But what struck me most was not just what he had done to me. It was what he was doing to everyone else. Victoria thought she was marrying someone honest and emotionally mature. His colleagues thought they were elevating someone whose character had been tested by tragedy. His clients would trust him because they believed his personal suffering had made him compassionate and dedicated to justice. All of them were being deceived and none of them knew it. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the street below. A couple walked past holding hands. A teenager sat on the bus stop bench scrolling through her phone. An elderly man walked a small dog that kept stopping to sniff every tree. Normal life continuing normally while I stood here holding knowledge that could detonate through Samuel's carefully constructed world like a bomb. Some lies are too big to let stand unchallenged. Some betrayals demand a response not because revenge will heal anything, but because silence becomes complicity. I thought about Victoria walking down the aisle toward a man she did not really know. I thought about Samuel's colleagues and clients trusting him based on a foundation of fiction. I thought about all the people who would attend his wedding next weekend and celebrate him without understanding what kind of person they were applauding. This was not about making Samuel suffer, though I would not pretend that thought held no appeal. This was about refusing to stay dead. This was about resurrecting the truth just enough to crack the carefully polished surface he had spent months building. This was about giving Victoria and everyone else in Samuel's fabricated world a chance to see who he really was before they invested any more of their trust and respect in someone who did not deserve it. I opened my laptop again and created a new email account, something anonymous and untraceable. Then I started researching. Wedding venues. Guest lists. Contact information for key people in Samuel's professional and personal life. I worked methodically, taking notes in a notebook I bought specifically for this purpose, building a careful architecture of truth that would deploy at exactly the right moment. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. But I had a plan, and for the first time since Samuel told me not to come to his graduation, I felt something other than grief or confusion or hollow determination. I felt purpose, clear and cold and certain, like ice forming on a winter lake. The notebook sat open on my kitchen table the next morning, filled with names and numbers and details I had collected through the night. My coffee had gone cold while I worked, but I barely noticed. I was building something precise, a structure of truth that would stand on its own without requiring me to be its architect in any visible way. Victoria's social media had provided the wedding venue without my needing to ask a single question. Ashford Estate, she had called it in her posts, though the official name was Riverside Manor, an upscale property 30 miles outside the city. The photographs she had shared showed manicured gardens and a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that required deposits larger than most people's annual salaries. She had tagged the location in multiple posts, hashtagging it with their wedding date and variations of words like blessed and grateful and forever. I spent Tuesday morning cross-referencing social media tags and law firm directories, building a map of who would be present at Samuel's wedding. Victoria's parents were easy to identify. Judge Richard Ashford and his wife Catherine appeared frequently in photographs from charity events and legal conferences, both of them polished and prominent in ways that explained exactly why Samuel had chosen their daughter. The guest list extended through their social network like branches on a family tree, each connection leading to more connections, more names, more people who believed Samuel's carefully constructed fiction. Samuel's law firm partners were there too, visible in his LinkedIn connections and Instagram tags. Morrison & Wells employed 60 attorneys across 4 practice areas, but only 5 were senior partners, and all 5 followed Samuel on social media and had commented on his engagement announcement. I wrote down their names and found their office numbers through the firm's website. By Wednesday afternoon, I had created a spreadsheet that mapped relationships and contact information for 30 key people who would attend the wedding. Victoria's family office manager. The wedding coordinator at Riverside Manor. The receptionist at Morrison and Wells. Samuel's direct supervisor. Victoria's maid of honor whose Instagram bio listed her as an assistant district attorney. Each name represented a point of contact, a place where truth could be planted and allowed to grow. I made my first call on Thursday morning. My hands were steady as I dialed the number for Riverside Manor, and when the wedding coordinator answered with professional cheerfulness, my voice came out calm and pleasant. Hi, this is Haley Thornton. I am calling to follow up on some billing details for the Thornton-Ashford wedding this Saturday. There was a brief pause, the kind that signals confusion being processed in real time. I am sorry, could you repeat your name? Haley Thornton. Samuel's wife. I just wanted to confirm that the payment arrangements have been finalized correctly. The pause lengthened. I could hear papers shuffling in the background, the click of a computer mouse. I am showing the primary contacts for this event as Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford. Are you a member of the wedding party? I am his wife, I said again, letting the words sit there without explanation or elaboration. Is there a problem with the account? No problem at all. I just need to verify some information. Can you hold for one moment? I held for 3 minutes while elevator music played through my phone. When the coordinator came back, her voice had shifted from confused to carefully professional. I apologize for the confusion. I will need to contact the primary account holder to clarify the contact list. Is there a number where you can be reached? I gave her my cell phone number and thanked her politely before hanging up. The seed was planted. The coordinator would call Samuel or Victoria to ask about the wife who had called about billing. They would have to explain. They would have to address a question that should not exist if Samuel's story about my death was true. I made the second call Friday morning to Morrison and Wells. The receptionist answered with practiced efficiency, and I asked to speak with Samuel Thornton regarding updates to spouse insurance benefits. Of course. May I ask who is calling? Haley Thornton, his wife. Another pause, this one shorter but weighted with uncertainty. Let me transfer you to his extension. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I left a brief message in the same pleasant tone, asking Samuel to call me back about insurance paperwork that needed his signature. Then I called back and asked the receptionist to leave him a note as well, just to ensure he received the message. I will make sure he gets this, she said. Just to confirm, you said you are his wife? Yes, that is correct. Haley Thornton. He should have my number in his contacts. I could hear her typing, probably adding a note to whatever message system they used. This would sit in his inbox, flagged as important, requiring explanation to anyone who saw it. The receptionist would mention it to colleagues. People would ask questions. The fiction Samuel had constructed would develop small cracks. The third call went to Victoria's family office, the number I had found listed on Judge Ashford's law clerk's LinkedIn profile. A young woman answered, her voice bright and efficient. Ashford Family Office, this is Jennifer. Hi Jennifer, this is Haley Thornton. I am calling about seating arrangements for the wedding this Saturday. I wanted to confirm where Samuel's wife should be seated during the ceremony. This pause was the longest yet. I am sorry, I think there might be some confusion. The seating chart shows Samuel Thornton as a single guest being seated with the groom's party. Are you a +1 who was added late? No, I am his wife. We have been married for several years actually. Is there a problem with the seating arrangements? Let me pull up the guest list. Can you spell your last name? I spelled it carefully while she typed. The silence that followed told me exactly what she was finding, which was nothing at all. I am not seeing your name on the guest list, Jennifer said, her professionalism cracking slightly into confusion. And the information we have shows Samuel as unmarried. Are you certain you have the correct wedding? Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford, this Saturday at Riverside Manor. That is the wedding I am asking about. Yes, that is correct, but I really think there has been some mistake. Let me get your contact information and I will have someone from the family reach out to you to clarify. I gave her my phone number and email address, thanked her for her help and ended the call. 3 calls, 3 different sources of confusion, all landing in Samuel's world in the 72 hours before his wedding. Each one required explanation. Each one raised questions that had no good answers. I made 2 more calls that afternoon. One to the florist listed in Victoria's Instagram posts, asking about delivery arrangements and mentioning I was Samuel's wife. one to what appeared to be Victoria's college roommate based on social media tags, leaving a voicemail congratulating her on being in the wedding party and introducing myself as someone who looked forward to meeting her at the ceremony. Each call was brief, professional, and deliberately confusing. I was not lying about who I was. I was simply existing in spaces where Samuel had declared me non-existent, speaking truth into a narrative built entirely on fiction. The calls would generate conversations. People would mention them to other people. The confusion would spread like ripples in water, reaching Samuel from multiple directions at once. I knew from 3 years of marriage that Samuel was someone who needed control over every detail of his image. He managed his social media presence the way other people managed investment portfolios. He carefully curated every interaction, every photograph, every public statement. These small disruptions would create anxiety he could not fully address because addressing them required either maintaining the lie or admitting the truth, and neither option gave him the control he craved. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, the kind of October day that photographers love for outdoor ceremonies. I woke early and dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I had originally planned to wear to Samuel's law school graduation, the one I had dry cleaned for an occasion I was never allowed to attend. I applied minimal makeup and pulled my hair back in a simple style. I wanted to look presentable but unremarkable, like someone who belonged in professional spaces without drawing unnecessary attention. I drove to Riverside Manor slowly, taking back roads through neighborhoods where autumn leaves created canopies of gold and red overhead. The estate appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with oak trees, the main building a restored Victorian mansion surrounded by gardens that looked like they required a full-time staff to maintain. Workers were already setting up when I arrived at 9 in the morning. White chairs arranged in perfect rows on the lawn. Floral arrangements being positioned near an arbor where Samuel would stand in a few hours. A string quartet setting up their instruments and music stands. Catering vans parked behind the building, staff members in black and white uniforms carrying supplies through service entrances. I parked across the street in a small public lot that served a walking trail, positioning my car where I had a clear view of the main entrance but remained far enough away to avoid notice. I settled into my seat with a bottle of water and the book I had brought as cover, though I had no intention of reading. Guests began arriving around 11:30. Expensive cars pulling up to the valet station. Women in elegant dresses and men in tailored suits. Air kisses and greetings that carried across the lawn. I watched Victoria's parents arrive in a black sedan, both of them immediately surrounded by people wanting to shake hands and offer congratulations. I watched Samuel's law firm partners arrive together, 3 middle-aged men and 2 women who looked like they had stepped out of a recruiting brochure for success. At noon, Victoria arrived in a white limousine, surrounded by her bridesmaids in pale pink dresses. Even from across the street I could see how stunning she looked, how perfectly she fit into this world of manicured lawns and crystal chandeliers. This was the woman Samuel had chosen to keep alive in his narrative, the one whose existence enhanced rather than embarrassed him. Samuel arrived 15 minutes later and seeing him after 8 months felt stranger than I expected. He looked successful and confident, wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, shaking hands and laughing with groomsmen I did not recognize. He looked like someone who had never scrubbed floors or counted change for groceries, someone who had always belonged in spaces like this. I checked my phone. No calls yet, but that would change soon. The wedding was scheduled to start at 1 o'clock, which meant people were gathering, checking their phones, making last-minute arrangements. The coordinator would be finalizing details. The receptionist from Morrison & Wells might be attending as a guest. Jennifer from Victoria's family office would certainly be here managing logistics. The confusion I had planted was about to bloom into something larger, something Samuel could not control or contain. And I would watch it unfold from across the street, the dead wife resurrecting herself just enough to crack the foundation of the beautiful lie he had built. I settled deeper into my seat and waited for the truth to arrive like an uninvited guest at a wedding that should never have happened in the first place. At 12:45 the guests began taking their seats. The string quartet transitioned from warming up to playing actual ceremony music, something classical that drifted across the lawn and reached me even from across the street. Samuel appeared from a side entrance of the manor and walked toward the altar with his groomsmen, all of them wearing matching tuxedos and boutonnieres. He looked calm and composed, Every inch the successful attorney about to marry into one of the most prominent legal families in the state. I watched him take his position beneath the floral arbor, checking his watch and exchanging words with the officiant. The guests settled into their white chairs, programs rustling, phones being silenced. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, a perfect ceremony for a perfect couple built on a perfect lie. Then Samuel's phone rang. Even from my position across the street I could see him stiffen. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen with an expression that started as irritation. He declined the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, saying something to the groomsman beside him that looked like an apology for the interruption. 30 seconds later it rang again. This time Samuel's frown deepened. He pulled the phone out again, stared at the screen longer, and I watched his jaw tighten in a way I recognized from 3 years of marriage. That was his tell when something was going wrong, but he was trying to maintain control. He declined the call again, but his composure had developed a crack. The phone rang a third time before he could put it away. Samuel stepped back from his position at the altar, holding up one finger to the officiant in a gesture that asked for a moment. He answered the call, pressing the phone to his ear while his free hand went to his hip. I could not hear what was being said, but I could read his body language. The way his shoulders hunched forward. The sharp gesture he made with his hand. The growing tension in his posture as whatever explanation he was trying to give clearly was not satisfying the person on the other end. Guests in the front rows began turning in their seats, whispering to each other. The officiant looked uncertain about whether to wait or try to proceed. One of the groomsmen approached Samuel and said something, but Samuel waved him away without taking the phone from his ear. Then I saw Victoria's mother stand up from her seat in the front row. Catherine Ashford had her own phone pressed to her ear, and her expression had shifted from composed matriarch to someone dealing with an unexpected crisis. She walked quickly toward the altar area, her elegant dress not quite suited for the pace she was moving. She reached Samuel just as he was ending his call, and she immediately began speaking to him while gesturing at her own phone. I watched Samuel shake his head, watched him try to explain something, but Catherine's expression was transforming from confused to suspicious. She kept pointing at her phone, her voice carrying across the lawn in fragments I could not fully make out but whose tone was unmistakably demanding answers. Other guests were checking their phones now. I could see the ripple effect moving through the rows of white chairs as people pulled out devices and looked at screens, then looked at each other with confused expressions. The wedding coordinator appeared from somewhere behind the manor, practically running across the lawn with her tablet clutched in both hands. She reached Samuel and Catherine and tried to show them something on her screen, her mouth moving rapidly in what looked like an attempt to explain a situation that made no sense. One of Samuel's law firm partners stood up from his seat, a man I recognized from LinkedIn as Richard Morrison, one of the founding partners of Morrison & Wells. He made his way to the front with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to taking charge in crisis situations. When he reached the growing cluster of people near the altar, he pulled out his own phone and showed Samuel something on the screen. Samuel's face had gone from irritated to genuinely panicked now. His hand ran through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. He was talking rapidly, gesturing with both hands, trying to explain something to multiple people at once. But whatever he was saying was clearly not resolving the confusion because more people kept approaching with phones and questions. The string quartet had stopped playing. The sudden silence made the chaos at the altar even more noticeable. Guests were standing now, craning their necks to see what was happening, whispering speculation that grew louder as the delay continued. Then I saw Victoria. She emerged from the manor in her wedding dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids in their pale pink gowns. She was supposed to wait for her musical cue before making her entrance, but something had clearly gone wrong with the timing. She took 3 steps onto the lawn before she seemed to register that the ceremony had not started, that something was very wrong at the altar where her groom should have been waiting calmly for her arrival. Victoria gathered her dress and walked quickly toward the cluster of people near the arbor, her face shifting from bridal joy to confusion to something harder as she got closer. I watched her reach Samuel, watched her grab his arm and pull him slightly away from the others. They stood face to face, and even from across the street I could see the intensity of whatever conversation was happening. Samuel was trying to calm her down, his hands making placating gestures, but Victoria was not having it. She stepped back from him, one hand going to her mouth in a gesture that looked like shock. Her mother moved to her side immediately, and now Samuel was surrounded by the two most important women in his fabricated life, both of them clearly demanding answers he could not provide without destroying everything. Judge Ashford stood up from his seat in the front row, his expression grave. He approached the group at the altar with the measured pace of someone who had presided over countless courtrooms and knew how to project authority even in chaos. When he reached Samuel, he said something brief, and I watched Samuel's face drain of color. More phones were ringing now. More guests were checking messages. The wedding coordinator was frantically typing on her tablet, probably trying to reach other vendors or contact someone who could explain what was happening. Samuel's law firm partners had gathered in a small cluster, speaking among themselves and glancing toward the altar with expressions that ranged from concerned to professionally suspicious. Victoria's hand had dropped from her mouth to her side, and she was staring at Samuel with an expression I recognized from my own experience. It was the look of someone watching a person they thought they knew transform into a stranger. Her mother had an arm around her shoulders, but Victoria seemed barely aware of the support. I checked the time on my phone. 10 minutes had passed since the ceremony was supposed to start. 10 minutes of Samuel's carefully constructed world collapsing under the weight of simple truth. The dead wife calling about billing. The dead wife inquiring about insurance benefits. The dead wife asking about seating arrangements. Each call a small bomb detonating in his fiction, creating confusion that multiplied and spread until it could no longer be contained or explained away. Samuel pulled out his phone again and appeared to be making a call himself now, probably trying to reach me, trying to figure out how to stop what was already in motion. But I had turned my phone off hours ago. There was nothing he could say that would put this back together. Judge Ashford was speaking to the officiant now, and I could read the body language clearly enough. The ceremony was being delayed indefinitely. The judge turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying with the projection of someone trained to command courtroom attention. I could not hear the exact words, but I could see the reaction. Guests standing, confused conversations erupting, people beginning to gather their belongings or move toward the manor entrance. Victoria's bridesmaids had surrounded her in a protective cluster, and I watched her turn away from Samuel and walk back toward the manor with her mother and her attendants forming a barrier between her and the man she had been about to marry. Samuel tried to follow, but Judge Ashford put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. The two men stood there having what looked like a very serious conversation while the wedding dissolved around them. I had seen enough. The truth had done its work, creating exactly the kind of chaos that could not be smoothed over with explanations or excuses. Samuel would have to choose now between admitting he had lied about my death or constructing even more elaborate lies to cover the first ones. Either choice would cost him something significant. His credibility. His relationship with Victoria. His standing at the law firm that had elevated him based on a character assessment built on fiction. I started my car and pulled slowly out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see the scene continuing to unfold. Guests streaming toward their cars or clustering in confused groups. The wedding coordinator standing alone near the arbor, staring at her tablet like it might contain answers. Samuel still talking with Judge Ashford, his gestures growing more desperate. The ghost he had tried to create had spoken from beyond the grave he dug, and the message was devastatingly simple. I'm still here. I exist. And lies, no matter how carefully constructed or widely believed, eventually collide with truth in ways that cannot be managed or controlled. I drove back toward the city slowly, taking the scenic route through neighborhoods where families were having normal Saturday afternoons. Children playing in yards. People washing cars. Couples walking dogs. Regular life continuing for people whose worlds had not just collapsed under the weight of fundamental deception. My phone stayed off in my purse. I did not need to hear Samuel's explanations or excuses. I did not need to witness the aftermath directly. I had done what I came to do, which was not to destroy him but simply to stop being dead, to exist loudly enough in the right spaces at the right time that his fiction could no longer hold. The revenge I needed was not violence or dramatic confrontation. It was just this. The truth deployed precisely, allowed to spread through his world like cracks in ice. What happened next was not my concern. I had served my final notice. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his ambition had proven capable of serving him one last thing he could not send back or ignore. I was alive. Inconvenient, unmarketable, completely real. And that, finally, was enough. I drove home through the Saturday afternoon traffic, the autumn sun filtering through trees that lined the highway in shades of copper and gold. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my breathing calm and even. There was no rush of adrenaline, no triumphant feeling coursing through my veins. Just this quiet sense of completion, like closing a book after reading the last page and setting it carefully on the shelf where it belongs. When I reached my studio apartment, I climbed the narrow stairs and unlocked the door to find everything exactly as I had left it that morning. The reading chair by the window. The plants on the sill catching the afternoon light. The small table with its folded napkin under one leg. My space, my sanctuary, untouched by the chaos I had created 30 miles away at an estate I would never visit again. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the street below where normal life continued its normal patterns. A mother pushed a stroller past the bookstore. 2 teenagers sat on the bench at the bus stop, sharing earbuds and laughing at something on a phone. An elderly man walked his dog, stopping patiently while the animal investigated every tree and lamppost. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small earthquake I had triggered in Samuel Thornton's carefully constructed reality. My phone stayed off for the rest of the weekend. I did not need to know what happened after I drove away. I did not need Samuel's explanations or excuses or attempts to spin the situation into something he could control. The truth had been deployed, and truth has its own momentum once released into the world. Sunday I worked my regular shift at Riverside Diner. Maria raised an eyebrow when I walked in, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who had known me for 6 years and could read my moods like weather patterns. "You look different," she said while we set up the coffee station before the morning rush. "Something happen?" "I took care of something I needed to handle," I replied, filling the industrial coffee maker with grounds. "That's all." She nodded slowly, asking nothing more but understanding in the way that good friends do. We worked our shift in comfortable rhythm, refilling cups and clearing plates and exchanging the kind of easy conversation that comes from shared labor and mutual respect. On Monday morning I finally turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls from Samuel. A dozen text messages that progressed from confused to angry to pleading. 3 voicemails I deleted without listening to. I blocked his number and went about my day as though nothing unusual had occurred, because in the architecture of my own life, nothing had changed except the weight I no longer carried. Tuesday afternoon, Emma called while I was reorganizing the storage closet at the diner during my break. "So I heard some interesting gossip," she said without preamble, "about a certain wedding that apparently went sideways this weekend." "Did it now?" I said, moving cans of tomato sauce to a higher shelf. "My friend Jennifer works as a paralegal at Whitman and Cross. She was invited to the Thornton-Ashford wedding because her boss does work with Judge Ashford. She said it was the most awkward ceremony she has ever attended." I said nothing, just kept organizing cans while Emma continued. "Apparently it was delayed by almost half an hour because the groom was getting calls and messages about his dead wife, who turned out to be not so dead after all. Jennifer said Victoria was in tears. The judge looked ready to call the whole thing off, and half the guests were on their phones trying to figure out what was happening." "Sounds complicated," I offered neutrally. The ceremony eventually went forward, but Jennifer said the reception was tense. Like everyone was pretending everything was fine while clearly nothing was fine. And now people are talking. Law firms love gossip, and a story about someone faking a spouse's death for sympathy is exactly the kind of thing that spreads. Emma paused, and I could hear the question she was not quite asking. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said. "But I'm not really interested in following up on any of it. What happens in Samuel's world is not my concern anymore." "Fair enough," Emma said. "I just thought you should know that whatever you did, it worked. People are asking questions he can't answer well." After we hung up, I finished organizing the closet and returned to my shift. The information Emma shared settled into my awareness without generating any particular emotion. Samuel's world was cracking in the ways I knew it would once truth entered the foundation. What happened next was between him and the people he had deceived, none of whom were my responsibility to protect or inform. The weeks that followed fell into the familiar patterns of my rebuilt life. Morning shifts at the diner. Afternoon walks through my neighborhood. Evening hours in my apartment reading or cooking simple meals that pleased only me and required no one else's approval. I had returned to the rhythm that sustained me, and I found it both sufficient and satisfying in ways that surprised me. 3 days after the wedding, Emma forwarded me a screenshot from social media without additional commentary. The image showed Samuel and Victoria at what appeared to be their reception, both of them dressed in wedding attire and smiling for the camera. But even through the filtered and edited photograph, something looked wrong. The smiles were too tight. Victoria's eyes held no warmth. Samuel's hand on her waist looked more like obligation than affection. The post had been shared by someone I did not know, one of Victoria's cousins, based on the profile information. The caption asked a question that had generated significant discussion in the comments below. Why would someone lie about a spouse dying? What does that say about their character and integrity? The comments were divided. Some people defended Samuel, suggesting he had been the victim of a malicious prank by an unstable ex. Others expressed doubt about his honesty and questioned whether someone capable of that level of deception could be trusted in professional settings. A few pointed out that multiple sources had received calls and messages from his supposedly dead wife, which seemed more coordinated than a random prank. I saved the screenshot to a folder on my phone and then closed the application. The mythology Samuel had built so carefully was developing cracks, and sunlight was getting into the fissures. What grew in those cracks was not my concern. I had simply planted truth in soil that had been cultivated with lies, and nature would take its course from there. The months that followed brought changes to my own life that had nothing to do with Samuel or his unraveling narrative. In February, Frank called me into his office at the diner and offered me a promotion to assistant manager. The position came with increased responsibility, better pay, and regular hours that would allow me to have actual weekends off for the first time in years. "You have earned this," Frank said in his characteristically brief way. "You show up, you work hard, you treat people with respect. That matters more than fancy credentials." Maria organized a small celebration in the break room, bringing in cake from the grocery store that Joe complained about while eating 2 generous pieces. Devon created a card that everyone signed with messages about appreciation and respect and how much they valued working with me. These people had become my family in the truest sense, the ones who saw me for who I actually was and valued that person without reservation or condition. The promotion felt more meaningful than any of Samuel's polished achievements because it was built on reality rather than fiction. I would not be featured in alumni magazines or celebrated at charity galas. But I had earned genuine respect from people whose opinions I actually valued, and that made it more substantial than anything constructed on fabricated tragedy. 6 months after the wedding that almost was not, Emma mentioned over coffee that her friend Jennifer had heard updates about Samuel through the legal community gossip network that apparently functioned as efficiently as any news service. "Victoria's parents hired someone to investigate after the wedding disruptions," Emma said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "They found out the truth about you. About how Samuel had been telling people you died when you were very much alive and paying half his rent." I sipped my own coffee and waited for her to continue. "The marriage went forward because calling it off would have been too embarrassing for everyone involved. But Jennifer says everyone knows it's strained. Victoria apparently feels betrayed on a fundamental level, which makes sense given that her husband built their entire relationship on a massive lie." "That sounds difficult for her," I said, and I meant it. Victoria had been a victim of Samuel's deception as much as I had been, just in different ways. Also, Morrison and Wells apparently had some serious conversations about Samuel's character and judgment. They did not fire him, but they are not fast-tracking him anymore either. The sympathetic widower narrative that helped him get hired has been replaced by questions about his integrity. I absorbed this information with the same neutral attention I had given all the previous updates. Samuel's professional reputation was becoming complicated in exactly the ways I expected once the foundation of lies was exposed. Truth, once released, shapes reality in ways that no amount of careful image management can control or redirect. "Does that feel satisfying?" Emma asked, watching my face. "Knowing that he's facing consequences?" I considered the question carefully. "It feels complete," I said finally. "I did not do this to punish him or to celebrate his struggles. I did it to stop being dead. To exist loudly enough that his fiction could not hold. What happens to him now is between him and the people he deceived. I'm just living my life." Emma nodded, understanding in ways that only someone who had witnessed the entire arc of this story could understand. We finished our coffee and talked about other things, normal things, the texture of a life that had moved beyond the need for revenge or vindication. I walked home through streets where spring was beginning to assert itself. New leaves on trees. Flowers pushing through soil in window boxes. The world renewing itself in cycles that had nothing to do with human drama or constructed narratives. I climbed the stairs to my studio apartment, unlocked the door and stepped into the space that was entirely and authentically mine. The truth had done its work. Samuel's carefully polished facade had developed cracks that would never fully repair. And I had stopped being the ghost he tried to create, reclaiming my existence through the simple act of refusing to stay buried in the grave he dug with lies. That was enough. That was everything. The calendar notification appeared on my phone in late October, a full year after Samuel had told me not to come to his graduation. The reminder read simply, "Anniversary," because I had never bothered to delete it after the divorce. 6 years since we had stood in that courthouse with Maria and Devon as witnesses, believing we were starting something that would last. I stared at the notification for a long moment, then dismissed it with a swipe of my finger. But the date lingered in my awareness throughout my shift at the diner, this marker of time that measured both how far I had come and how completely my life had transformed from what I once imagined it would be. After work, I did something I had never done before. I made a reservation at Marcelli's, an Italian restaurant downtown that I had walked past countless times but never entered because the prices listed on the menu board outside were more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. But I had received my first paycheck as assistant manager, and I decided this anniversary deserved acknowledgement, not as mourning for what was lost but as celebration for what I had survived and rebuilt. The hostess seated me at a table by the window as evening settled over the city. The restaurant was elegant in an understated way, with white tablecloths and soft lighting and the kind of atmosphere that suggested special occasions and celebrations. I felt briefly self-conscious sitting alone at a table clearly designed for couples or small groups, but I pushed that feeling aside. This evening was mine, earned through resilience and the quiet work of rebuilding a life from materials I thought had been destroyed. I ordered wine that cost more per glass than Samuel and I used to spend on entire bottles from the discount liquor store near our old apartment. When it arrived, I held the glass up to the light and watched how the deep red caught and refracted the glow from the candle on the table. The first sip was rich and complex, with layers of flavor that unfolded across my tongue in ways that cheap wine never achieved. This was what quality tasted like when you could finally afford it through your own honest work. The server brought the chef's special, a pasta dish with ingredients I could not have pronounced a year ago but that I had learned to appreciate through small acts of treating myself well. The presentation was beautiful, each element arranged with care that elevated the meal beyond mere sustenance into something approaching art. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling completely whole in a way I had never felt even during the years Samuel and I were married. There was no one across from me making dismissive comments about my lack of sophistication or my working-class tastes. No one measuring my worth against people from better families or more prestigious backgrounds. No one treating my presence as something to be hidden or apologized for. Just me, alone at a table by the window, present in my own life without apology or shame or the constant awareness of falling short of someone else's expectations. Between courses, I watched the city lights coming on as darkness settled fully over the streets. People walked past the restaurant window on their way to wherever their Saturday evenings were taking them. A couple holding hands. A group of friends laughing about something. A woman walking alone with confident strides and earbuds blocking out the world. All of them living their own stories, facing their own struggles, building their own versions of what a good life looked like. I thought about Samuel, probably sitting down to dinner with Victoria in some equally nice restaurant, possibly even nicer given her family's resources. I wondered if he ever thought about this anniversary, if he remembered the date or if he had successfully erased it along with all other evidence of our marriage. I wondered if Victoria knew that today marked 6 years since he had married someone he would later declare dead for convenience. But those thoughts came without the sharp edge of pain they once carried. Samuel's life was his own now, contaminated by lies he would have to manage indefinitely but no longer connected to mine in any meaningful way. Whatever difficulties he faced were consequences of his own choices, and I had no obligation to care about or track his struggles. The server brought dessert, a small masterpiece of chocolate and cream that looked too beautiful to eat but tasted even better than it looked. I savored it slowly while finishing my wine, feeling grateful for this moment and this meal and this life I had built from the ruins of what I once thought I wanted. Understanding settled over me as I sat there in the quiet elegance of that restaurant. Being erased from someone's story does not mean you cease to exist. It only means you exist outside the boundaries of their narrative, free to write your own story using your own words and your own truth. Samuel had tried to make me invisible through systematic erasure that culminated in my fictional death. But erasure only works if you cooperate with it, if you accept the judgment that you are not worth remembering or acknowledging. I had refused to cooperate. Not through dramatic confrontation or public spectacle, but through the simple act of existing loudly enough in the right places at the right time to crack the foundation of lies he had built. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his notice had proven capable of serving him one final order he could not decline or send back to the kitchen. Truth, delivered with precision at exactly the moment when it would cause maximum disruption to fiction. I paid the check and left a generous tip for the server who had made this evening special with attentive service that never felt intrusive. As I gathered my coat and purse, I caught my reflection in the darkened window glass. The woman looking back at me was not the person I had been a year ago, broken and confused in Emma's guest room, trying to comprehend how love turned into annihilation. She was not even the person I had been 3 years ago, shrinking herself to fit inside Samuel's ambitions while her own dreams stayed locked away. This woman was Haley Brennan, assistant manager at Riverside Diner, holder of modest achievements earned through honest work, survivor of betrayal who had learned that being dismissed is not the same as being dismissible. I had scars from this experience, places where trust had broken and might never fully heal. But I also had clarity about my worth that came from being valued by good people who measured character through actions rather than credentials or connections. The studio apartment above the bookstore waited for me when I walked home through streets that smelled like autumn leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. I climbed the stairs and unlocked the door to the space that was entirely mine, furnished with pieces I had chosen and paid for myself. The reading chair where I spent Sunday evenings with books from the shop downstairs. The small table with its folded napkin under one leg that held my coffee every morning. The plants on the windowsill that I had kept alive through consistent care and attention. Everything in this apartment carried meaning rather than serving as props in someone else's curated life. This was not performance or image management. This was just living, honest and modest and completely real. The life I had built was not glamorous or impressive by the standards Samuel valued. I would never be featured in alumni magazines or celebrated at charity galas. But it was solid in ways that fiction could never be, built on authenticity rather than manufactured tragedy. I made tea and sat in my reading chair by the window, watching the street below where the evening continued in patterns that had nothing to do with my small personal history. A young couple walked past arguing about something, their voices carrying up to my window before fading into distance. The bookstore owner locked up for the night, testing the door twice to make sure it was secure before walking to his car parked at the curb. Normal life continuing normally the way it always had and always would, indifferent to individual dramas and personal transformations. Samuel had tried to write me out of his story, to erase me so completely that I became nothing more than a tragic footnote in his narrative of perseverance and success. But stories have a way of asserting their own logic, demanding internal consistency, punishing those who falsify fundamental facts. His story would always be contaminated by the lie at its center, the dead wife who turned out to be alive and capable of disrupting his carefully planned wedding with nothing more than truth delivered precisely. My story was different. It was clean, built on survival and the quiet power of continuing to exist despite someone else's determination to erase me. It was not a story people would tell at networking events or use to generate sympathy and professional opportunities. It was just mine, honest and hard-won and sufficient. I raised my teacup toward my reflection in the dark window, a small toast to the woman I had become. Not the ghost Samuel tried to create but someone solid and present and whole. Someone who had learned that the best revenge is not destruction or punishment, but simply refusing to disappear. Simply continuing to exist with dignity and honesty while the lies collapse under their own weight. The evening stretched ahead with no demands on my time or attention. I could read or cook or simply sit in this chair watching the city lights and feeling grateful for this ordinary, extraordinary life. Tomorrow I would work my shift at the diner. I would pour coffee and clear plates and exchange easy conversation with people who valued my presence and my contributions. I would come home to this apartment and these routines and this quiet satisfaction that came from building something real. That was enough. That was everything. The ghost had learned to live again, not by haunting the person who tried to kill her off, but by claiming her own space in the world and refusing to be anything other than fully, completely, inconveniently alive. I finished my tea and set the cup down gently on the small table. Outside my window, the city continued its evening rhythms. And inside this modest apartment above a used bookstore, I sat in my reading chair feeling absolutely complete, defined not by someone else's shame or limited by someone else's ambitions, but by my own resilience and my own refusal to stay buried in a grave dug with lies. The anniversary had passed. The ghost had lived. And that, finally, was the entire story. If this story of truth-serving justice had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Samuel's phone started ringing at the altar, and his perfect facade began crumbling in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.